Good afternoon, Vicky. Good afternoon, Sherry. It's a pleasure for me to have you here with me. I'm Etionio Larondo, as you know, the Executive Director of the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment. And today we start with you a special feature of our videos, recordings, and information dissemination sessions, where we're going to systematically try to showcase some of the work that scientific board members from the Melissa Institute are doing and their collaborators. Introduce the both of you to our audience. Victoria Banyard is a professor in the School of Social Work at Rutgers University and the State University of New Jersey. She is the Associate Director of the Center on Violence Against Women and Children directly. Sherry Hamby is a research professor of psychology at the University of the South. Sewanee, is that how you pronounce? Sewanee, and director of Life Path Research Center. Together, Vicky and Sherry have a humbling amount of publications. I think I was counting, I think way over 200 together between the two of you. So the two of you are responsible for quite a lot of the printing that is taking place in our field. We're honored to have you with us. The reason we're meeting today is that we are discussing their new publication, Strength-Based Prevention, Reducing Violence and Other Public Health Problems, published by the American Psychological Association, and which is a very prestigious printer. So congratulations to publisher. Congratulations to both of you. Yeah, we want to give our audience a sense of your ideas. What got you to do this book? You know, what's in it? What can they expect, and what are your hopes are for the impact that it may have in their careers and in the field. So take it. Tell me, Vicky, what drove you to do this?
Well, thanks. It's a great question. So I think the short, long answer is that I like many people grew up with prevention or the absence of it, right? And so my education, work in school, as I was coming up as a kid and an adolescent, was that there wasn't actually very much prevention that I was exposed to that was happening. And then I was in graduate school training to be a clinical psychologist and working with children and adolescents and families, and doing treatment and response, as many of us do, and really confronting the limitations of that and wanting to see if we could do something earlier. That sort of combined with reflecting on my own experience that there wasn't a lot of that earlier prevention in the communities and schools that I was part of, really got me interested in this idea of prevention, which is really what I've been researching for most of my career, and particularly focused on interpersonal violence prevention, and have had the chance to know Sherry since we were postdocs a few years ago, and sharing an office and sharing some of these ideas. And so in some ways, the motivation for this book has also been this collaboration and friendship with Sherry over many years of our careers in interpersonal violence, and wanting to say some things about prevention.
Fantastic, fantastic. How about you, Sherry? Were you recruited into this task?
I think so to sort of pick up from where Vicky was talking about, I also had some earlier frustrating experiences with prevention. Both from my youth. As I mentioned in the book, I grew up in the scared straight era, where they thought that, that if, so like my driver's education class, which I think this actually still happens in a lot of them, they showed us a whole bunch of wrecks. And then one day they actually piled a bunch of us into a van and drove us around to all these different accidents, and that somehow that this was going to teach us to be safe drivers, and which it really just can't overstate. I mean, I was 16 years old, and that was the first time I saw a dead body, and so to think that this is going to somehow be some sort of helpful process in me learning how to drive, I just think that was kind of, crazy thinking about it. And, and then, on the other side, when I became a provider myself, I'm like both of you, trained in clinical psychology, just realizing that a lot of these programs weren't having the impact that they were designed to do, and that they really weren't meeting people's needs. But to sort of fast forward through that, some years ago, I was thinking the other day, Vicki, it's actually been almost 10 years ago since we got that first resilience portfolios grant, which it does just seem like that could be that much time had gone past. But and so I actually had kind of recruited Vicki, is what I would say, into that. And she'd been really well enmeshed into prevention for several years at that point. And like, come and do this project with me, it'll be fun. And so we spent several years working on this project that led the development of the resilience portfolio model. And it was really working on that we realized that a lot of the same insights about needing to focus on building up strengths and not just, trying to take away symptoms or somehow treat trauma as this, carved out separate piece of people's lives instead of looking more holistically at their lives. We realized that a lot of those insights could actually circle back around into Vicki's backyard with prevention. And so that's why we decided to adapt the resilience portfolio model for prevention. And then we just really cleverly decided to call it the prevention portfolio model.
Yeah, and in a minute, I'd like you to elaborate on that, since it is kind of like at the core of what the book is about. It's about leading people for them to understand how they can create and work towards the prevention portfolio model integrated into the practices and to the research and practices. So, but let me ask you, so one of the things that clearly you make abundantly clear in your book is that lack of exposure to prevention is not really the problem. That we have really exposed kids and adults and parents and anybody that we can over the last couple of decades in particular to all sorts of prevention strategies. And so that's not where the problem has been. Yet we find again and again that people in general, the individual, relational, and collectively, continue to make the wrong decisions, so to speak. And I know part of what you mentioned in the book, which I totally agree, and it was at the core of a lot of the clinical practice that I did some years back, had to do with the notion of irrationality, that we are in a very deep level as human beings. We are irrational beings. We choose to cross the highway in the middle, not to really walk to the side, we wait for the light to change. We smoke when we shouldn't. We do all sorts of things that we know are not good for us, are not rational. And I wonder if you can tell me how this links in with your piece on and your perspective on prevention.
Yeah. So I think I can start. Maybe that sounds good. And then Sherry, you can jump in. But I think that there are a couple of sort of myths, if you will, that are kind of behind some of what we talk about in the book in terms of limitations of current prevention. And that research kind of goes against, even though we sort of think this is how people act or how we get them to behave. And as you say, it's yummy, right? Like there's all kinds of reasons we don't eat our vegetables, right? Even though we know that we really should, and we tell our kids that they should. And I think part of it is that we think that maybe if we give people advice that they'll just follow it, right? So a lot of prevention is kind of built on admonishment programs about don't do this or don't do that, as opposed to helping to fortify people or give them opportunities to think about what they should do, right? What's the healthy alternative? What are we actually trying to get people to work towards? I think the other thing is that a lot of our models of prevention are really built on the idea about our thought processes, our cognition, right? That it's based on this idea that in a moment we are thinking through the options and trying to make a choice, right? When in fact, in many, many, many circumstances, particularly the ones where that around behaviors that we're talking about prevention with, a lot of emotion is involved, and also a lot of things about the situation and how the situation and the relationships and the norms, all of those things. And those are also very powerful drivers of behavior. And yet the way we design prevention to date mostly focuses on trying to give people knowledge in this very rational, focused on thinking kind of way, which is not a toolkit that in fact is going to be enormously helpful to them when prevention is most important, which is when they are in these relational and often very emotional kinds of situations. And so there's a mismatch there, I think.
So more or less like the whole idea that somehow our brains and our behavior responds more like a computer. So if you put the right kind of inputs, you're gonna get processed out, and then you have the logic will tell you to go in a particular direction. That's the old model, right? That you are criticizing, the box model that you put it in and it comes out. So what is the alternative? What is in your mind?
Sherry, you want to take that?
Sure. So the alternative, so in behavioral economics, so the work of the Nobel Prize winning psychologist, Daniel Kahneman and other people, Amos Tversky and others, they call this like hot cognition and cold cognition. And I think that's kind of a handy way to think about it. So, the basic classic prevention curriculum where you go into a classroom and the kids are all sitting at their desk and they're kind of shuffling and you're getting up and saying, don't drive drunk or don't use drugs or don't, hit people or bully or whatever. I mean, that would all fit into like cold cognition, so that's, when you're as close as we ever get to those computers where you put something in and you get like a rational answer back out again. But as Vicky was saying, most of the challenges in our life come in moments of hot cognition or not just cognition, but, emotions and everything else too, that they're challenging, or, we're worried about what other people are going to say. We're worried about being rejected. Maybe we're, trying to, make some sort of romantic or sexual overture. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are like hormones are coursing and our blood is pumping and, or maybe we're scared or mad. I mean, those are the times when people do things that they shouldn't be doing. And then those are also the times when, if we're trying to stop smoking or trying to stop drinking, those are the kinds of things that put us vulnerable for relapse, is when we're under a lot of stress for one reason or another. And so, what prevention needs to do is shift to recognizing that we need to prepare for those hot moments and that we need to help people with tools that are going to help them in those more difficult challenges. And also, even more broadly, like to build up kinds of strengths that are going to help them in those moments and lots of other ones too. So if they're good at conflict resolution or they're good at social skills, those kinds of things are going to be, the more skilled they are at those kinds of essential tools for living, the more they're going to be able to deal with those sort of hot moments without, making mistakes that they're probably going to regret. The other thing about this issue that just always, like right before the three of us started recording for this, right, we were talking about Thanksgiving. And, I think Thanksgiving is actually like a pretty good example of one of these moments when most of us do things that we know that we're not supposed to do, right? We intentionally, we overeat, perhaps we drink a little bit too much. And, and so it's a little bit hypocritical, I think, sometimes when providers act like we don't ever make these kinds of mistakes ourselves, or that we don't ever, experience these kinds of challenges. And that so another thing I think is a big problem in the field is that there is this this persona, this idea about what a professional persona looks like, where we don't admit to having any of these kinds of problems ourselves, or even acknowledge like what a moderate approach like this would be. So, I think people should eat healthy diets, and I think it's good to stay away from junk food and stuff like that. But, we made a bunch of pies and things for Thanksgiving dinner, and I ate too much, which I pretty much do every year. And, and that doesn't, necessarily make me a bad person or destroy my diet or mean that I'm going to be unhealthy. And so I think a lot of times, that young people who are so often the targets of our prevention, they know this stuff too. And so when we get up and we talk about these things as if we're just always in these, rational, cold-blooded moments, that they know that we're not really connecting to their lives very much, and that we're not really even representing our own lives very accurately.
One thing that came out to my mind when I was reading the book is I think that you say it in different ways, but the message comes across strongly that the success of prevention efforts are not so much in the new phase, in this new age of prevention that you are announcing, relies not so much in the elimination or eradication of the toxic conditions, but in the creation of rituals and practices that lead to life worth living, that take care of your health, take care of your spirit, take care of the relationship, take care of, all of the different components that you guys touch on. And is that correct? Did I get that message correctly from the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I do think that fundamentally it's about really shifting to a strengths-based perspective rather than a fully sort of risk reduction perspective. And part of that is, as you say, and as Sherry was just talking about, it's about appreciating that prevention can be happening even when you're not talking about the topic you're trying to prevent, exactly. Right? That you are trying to help people create a life worth living, help them have the foundation of strengths. And there's no one magic bullet strength, right? We know this from our research and other people's research. It's about having a portfolio, right? It's about having a variety of strengths that you can tap into that are really going to provide that foundation, as opposed to that the only way to do violence prevention is to talk about what violence is, that about broadening that perspective. And I think it's also about broadening it beyond, I think even right now, right? And I, as a psychologist, this is a tendency that I always have, which is to talk to the individual. Also where a lot of our prevention goes, talking to one student at a time, right? Or one classroom at a time, and not really thinking about that broader context. And I think what the broader research that we pull into the book suggests to us is that we also need to not leave the responsibility for prevention on each one individual at a time, but rather we need to think also about how to change contexts, how to change opportunity structures. And we talk some in some of the chapters of the book about how even social movements and social justice change are incredibly embedded within successful prevention efforts, because we also need to think about the broader context and policies and climate and those kinds of things also can be powerful forces for prevention beyond just leaving it the responsibility of one individual at a time.
And now maybe you can help me, and then let's talk about specifically an area that you are national, international expert on, which is violence and violence prevention. So tell me, what does the application of the prevention portfolio model looks like on the area of violence prevention? And you can pick a particular manifestation of violence or speak about it generally as you see fit.
Yeah, well, I think it would look like what Vicky was just talking about. And so, when right now, the way the system is set up, the way that grants come out, the way that, that people, the way that a lot of violence prevention, for example, is based in, rape crisis or domestic violence centers, like those are where, and so it gets organized around like coming out and talking about violence for, an hour or 6 hours or whatever the case may be. But we really think that what would do a much better job of preventing violence in the long run would be shifting those resources into things like positive youth development. And so you wouldn't necessarily, I mean, that would be like really what the gigantic shift would be of a strengths-based approach, is that you, by investing in positive youth development, and one of the probably most important things you can offer people of any age is some kind of meaning making or sense of purpose, and helping them connect to something larger than themselves. So if they are, so if you take high school students and let them tutor kindergartners, or you get them involved with volunteering for Habitat for Humanity, or if they do some kind of urban greening project in their city neighborhoods, things like that are actually going to have a lot more impact in the long run, and they're going to teach people a lot of the skills that they need. They're going to help them develop their meaning making. They're going to teach them different kinds of regulatory skills. So they're going to help them with their emotion regulation if they're learning how to help these kindergartners and deal with frustrations, or if they're showing up to volunteer and they're learning how to use power tools. That these are the kinds of things that build up all of the domains of our portfolio model. So meaning making, regulatory skills, interpersonal skills, and people who have a full life like that, those are the people that in the real world are a lot less involved in violence or substance abuse or any other problem. Or, even if you wanted to do something that looked like a more classic prevention curriculum, another model that we would recommend would be something like Howard Markham's PrEP model, which is this relationship enhancement training for engaged couples in the original formulation of it. And so that's bringing couples in and trying to teach them how to have conversations about important topics, like, do you want to have kids? Like, what religious practices is this family going to follow? Decisions about money, the kinds of big things that can cause problems in relationships. Teach them basic skills about conflict resolution, and teach them how important it is to continue to show that they care and love for each other, like even once they get swept up in the day-to-day stresses of work and everything else. And, and that those are the kinds of skills that people need to avoid ending up in, abusive relationships. And shifting to that is what we're looking for people to do. And so that they're not necessarily, when they think about preventing violence, that they're not necessarily going in and going, we think violence is bad, because people already know that you're not supposed to like hit people or rape people. But these are the things that you need to do so that you can have healthy relationships and loving relationships that don't end up spilling over into violence, even on the most challenging moments of those marriages or friendships or whatever we're talking about.
Because so you agreeing there.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are two really good examples. And we try to talk in the book about, some other kinds of applied examples, and also try to break down some different strategies that might cut across and might not be specific to any one particular program. I think Sherry gave some good examples, but some principles that, particularly this focus on trying to integrate more strengths. And when Sherry and I have presented about some of these topics, one of the things that we'll often ask an audience is to think about, if you're involved in doing a prevention program, what would you say, what would it look like? What are the behaviors that look like that you would want someone or a group or what have you to be doing that would indicate that there wasn't the problem there, right? So rather than, we're very good at assessing the things we don't want to have there, but what do we want instead of the absence of something? How do we define the presence of? And what is it the presence of that we're trying to reach in our prevention programs? I would ask people to really think about, how would you know it when you saw it? What is it? And then think about building a program from that.
Yeah. And another piece, if I can just jump in with like one more piece, is that I think too often that we especially psychologists who, get trained so much to focus on individuals or maybe on families, but even, teachers and social workers and other professionals, like we don't do enough to think about environments too. And so, so if you take the issue of violence, a lot of the problem of violence is a problem of youth. Most of the violence that occurs happens if the perpetrators are in their teens or their 20s, and even by the time people get into their 30s and 40s, it's starting to taper off pretty substantially. And part of that are kind of built-in developmental and physiological processes, right? So what happens in your late teens and 20s is that you've developed a lot of the social skills and cognitive skills, so that you are interested in different kinds of relationships. You're exploring out beyond your family, but your frontal lobe still has a long way to go, right? So now we know that doesn't really develop until you're about 25, fully develop until you're about 25 years old or so. And so that kind of impulsiveness that you see among young people is something that's just kind of hardwired in. And so at some level, we also just have to let go of the idea that just by, coming and going, you guys need to act more like 35-year-olds, like there's going to be a limited benefit to that, because they're not 35-year-olds. And so, one of the other solutions to that is to think more about the environment and how you can change the environment to make it supportive while they go through these really important developmental processes. I mean, there are some advantages to the sort of combination of skills that they have along with this impulsivity. So it makes it possible, for example, for them to, start to separate from their family unit and go off and explore and be independent. And, that balance of, a little bit of recklessness, a little bit of impulsivity, along with like enough sort of social and cognitive skills to do that sort of exploring. I mean, it serves its some purposes that we probably can't change or can't get rid of, but we can do things in school settings. We can have more adults in spaces where the risk of bullying, for example, is higher. So, putting more adults in cafeterias, on putting a second adult on a school bus, because the bus driver obviously can't watch the kids in the road at the same time. In Iceland, they've had good luck with this program to reduce binge drinking among adolescents by getting they call it a parent crawl, I think. Is that the right word, Vicki?
Parent prowl, I think.
Parent prowl, I think.
Yeah.
And that's more alliterative. And, and so they've just got the parents to like kind of go out and, instead of sort of huddling in and just watching television, like go out on the weekend nights and be out in the neighborhood. And so it was less likely that kids were going to, start getting into this cascade of trouble that would just lead to, alcohol poisoning or something like that. And by getting the parents more involved outdoors in the community, out there in the same spaces that their teenagers and young adult children were, that they successfully reduced substance abuse and some of the other related problems to that. So I think that that's part of this whole kind of nudge idea too, is that what can we do to change the environment? Because kids are still going to be kids, and there's always going to be sort of impulsive and risk taking. And so not to try to put all of the responsibility for preventing these problems on the backs of 17 or 18 and 19-year-olds.
One thing that is exciting about your book is that there seems to now be a critical mass of intellectual investment and kind of like developments in different fields that are leading towards a similar conclusion. The need to think differently and to use your language in innovative and creative ways about prevention. And the truth, we need that, because otherwise, I'm thinking there is an optimism in your book. There seems to be an optimistic view that we're reaching a tipping point, that perhaps we're getting to a moment of kind of like changing the the way that we do that. The three of us have witnessed in the field of violence in public health over the years. There have been people who made a call for significant changes. They've been telling us for a long time. George Albee, which you mentioned, just to begin with, and many, many others. They have come, they have said it, and the ripples have not really continued too far. But you do seem to be optimistic that that's going to be different this time. And I wonder if it's connected to this fact that there are many disciplines are coming to the same conclusion, and the time may be right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I do think that's where some of the optimism in the book does come from. I mean, I think this idea, you know, there's now a whole field that calls itself resilient science, right? That so we have a critical mass of empirical work that's really trying to measure strengths as something besides the absence of risk factors, right? And you know, a good bit of it is been done by Sherry and some of her colleagues recently, developing new measurement tools on this. But I think it's also what we really try to harness is that you're right, that lots of different lanes and fields have been trying to deal with this, whether it's dealing with exercise and healthy eating, or whether it's dealing with substance use or different forms of violence prevention, right? Like up until now, and maybe it's the case when a field is trying to establish itself, it has to kind of talk about understanding incidence and prevalence and what do we know about this problem. And I think as, you know, optimistically, as a field grows and progresses, then we start to say, okay, how do we prevent it? And how do we see how it links to other things? So we don't have to always reinvent the wheel, that there are other fields in public health and other areas that have been working on this longer, and we can draw insights from that. And if we all work together, then we can pool our resources and our insights and try to make prevention, better, more effective. And so I do think we try to harness that, bringing all of these different fields together to say, let's see how they talk to each other and come together to support this strengths-based approach.
Great book for an interdisciplinary kind of like a course to bring in folks from nursing, psychology, social work, sociology, economy. I think it would be it's a fantastic opportunity to do that. Most universities, or many of them, they claim to wanting to produce that kind of interdisciplinary thinkers and actors. And I think you're preparing a tool that is going to be very helpful for many of those who really want to do it. And so I appreciate, I think we got a good idea of what you really mean in a concrete way for the prevention portfolio model. And are there things in particular, you know, a take-home message that you would like to get to the audience, and that's something that we have not touched on that you would like them to remember, and as they move on, first of all, they go and get the book, read it, and apply it to their lives. And so what would be a couple of things that you would like the folks to take with you or with them?
You know, well, yeah, definitely, you know, go get the book. That's one good one for sure. Thank you for suggesting that. But, you know, I think just that this idea that we can really make such a much bigger impact on people's lives, that people, you know, one of the focus groups I did some years ago, you know, they said, you know, that they want to learn how to thrive, not just how to avoid getting in, you know, abusive relationships. And, you know, honestly, that was also something probably from, like 15 years ago now. And that has just really stuck with me, that's, you know, that people, you know, I think sometimes that these prevention programs are not that well received, that sometimes kids or college students, or, you know, who get the bulk of it, you know, high school and college students probably, that they sort of resent having to be dragged to them and, you know, grumble about it. And sometimes they sort of shuffle their feet and look down and they don't want to participate. And, you know, and a lot of times that we tend to just think that they're not being receptive, but I actually think that they are really hungry for help in learning how to build good lives, and that we need to pay more attention to the feedback that they're trying to give us, that this is not the kind of help that they want. But I don't think we should take that means that they don't want help. And when you do, teach them, how to thrive in relationships, or how to succeed in school, or how to find meaning, that they just light up, and they're just, often just so immediately grateful. And I think that that's just something that everybody wants deep down inside. And that, as both of you said, that we have gotten to this point where we really have a lot of information that we're not harnessing as well as we could to help them meet those goals.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I would say, dare to go big, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what I mean by that is a couple of things. I think that sometimes I get the feeling that we sort of design our prevention, particularly in the lane that I often work, which is program evaluation, and we kind of design things around what we know how to measure, right? We're really good at measuring attitudes. We're really much better at measuring risk factors than strengths. And so that kind of drives the bus, right? Mm-hmm. Even though what we're learning is that shouldn't really be centered in what we're doing. And so I think in the book, we really try to dare to go big and to give specific examples and stories of what that might look like. And so to give just 2 examples, one is in thinking about strengths. So, there's no one magic bullet that we find, right? If you look at the resilience portfolio model and research that we've done on that, if you look at other research, in the violence lane, people have been talking about, work Sherry's done on polyvictimization. It's about the range of things that you're exposed to. Well, we find that in strengths, that it's about polystrengths, that it's about the dose of strengths that you bring to your life. And so finding ways to really expand that strengths toolkit and to really think about it over the life course, right? Again, we tend to, when we think about a curriculum in an education setting, like K through 12, for example, we think about how social studies builds on each other across the years, right? But we don't tend to do that when we talk about prevention. We put a slice in here and then somebody else puts a slice in over here, and it may or may not be connected. And I think there are ways that we could really think about connecting up and having a more intentional lifespan plan about prevention, and that we can think bigger about what we're doing. And that even though at the first blush that feels like, well, that would take too many resources, it already takes a lot of resources. And I think actually it will make us use the resources we have in a smarter way that may be more effective.
Wonderful. And in the spirit of thinking bigger, so there'll be people who will listen to this conversation, listen to this recording, and who may have an idea of what they would like to do. Are you guys open for them to reaching out directly to you and kind of like telling you, this is what we have in mind, this is what does it fit in? Because with any new model like the one you're developing, you're the architect. You get the author. What do you call the rights to edit things as you go? And but I suspect people would still have questions, and I want to know, is it okay if we put your, as I said, we would your contact information that they can reach out to you directly?
Yeah.
Do they have some?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So we will do that. We will do that. Thank you very much to both of you, Vicky and Sherry, for putting together the book, for bringing it to the Institute as an opportunity to share with our audience, and we'll pass it on to our friends in social media too. And I really hope that a lot of people make good use of the wonderful work and the years of work that you put together and getting this. Believe me, putting a book together, I know it's not an easy thing. So I'm very, very happy and appreciative of your efforts in doing this. And thank you again. We'll be in touch. All right.
All right. Thank you, Etienne. Thank you so much for having us and for your support of us and the book.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and it is, as you both know, I mean, that's what we aspire to do at the Melissa Institute, to bring the best knowledge available to our communities. And we started doing it specifically about violence and violence prevention from the beginning. But as your book is a good example of, the definition of what is necessary for violence prevention has expanded all the way to the point now of really understanding that advocacy and social change is an important piece of that too. So the Institute is trying to live with the development of the field and try to lead it too. So thank you for helping us do that. All right.
Thank you for your
Take
work.
care. Bye.